Dan Campbell has restored the roar in Detroit in just 2 years, taking the Lions from a scrappy, knee-biting underdog to a team that now feels like everybody is riding with, hosting legit playoff expectations as the odds-on gambling favorite to win the NFC North, and many think this team could go even further than that. But coming in with the 17th spot in my power rankings, also with one team left to be revealed in the NFC North, it goes without saying that I have at least a few questions on whether or not this team should be such frontrunners. And today in this deep dive, we are going to take a look at some of those questions along with the many strengths that this team has that definitely justify a lot of those high expectations. But before we do dive in, a lot goes into this series, and I just ask you, please just take a second to hit that like button. It really does help. Man, I would just love to see what one of these deep dives would do if we could get 5,000 likes on one of these videos. We're getting 20K views. I know a lot of you guys are sticking around, so what are you waiting for? Hit that like button. Let's see what happens. But if nothing else, please do subscribe if you enjoy the series. We got 16 more. We're at the halfway point, baby. Let's go. We got 16 more of these to do in about 2 months. So they're going to be coming out every 2 or 3 days here as we lead up to the season. But this is going to be a really fun one. Let's get into it. As always, starting by taking a look at this team's offseason. And I'm just going to be honest, this was a good offseason. This team got better, just as 29 or 30 out of 32 NFL teams do every offseason. And they made a lot of good moves. But for those that watch my draft coverage, I'll just lay it out there. I don't know that this team did the best with what they had. I mean, they had set this offseason up to clear cap space after the Matt Patricia era. They had loaded up on draft picks to really make a push to get game-changing talent plugged into a team that had spent 2 years establishing the core of this team, and I'm not sure they did. And I think that's really where, for me, I see all the hype on this team, and I've been a part of the hype for over a year now. In this series last year, I was saying the Lions over is one of the best over-under bets of the year. This team is coming. So I'm not some Lions hater, but there was a little bit of the wave kept going, and I saw their offseason, and I was like, It was kind of the first time in this new regime with Dan Campbell and, of course, Brad Holmes, the GM, where I was like, I don't really agree with a lot of the moves they made. But I do want to talk about all these moves. It was a very busy offseason. They definitely have some losses, most of which that they admitted to themselves or are okay with. A lot of those kind of planned losses, even if some of these guys got a lot of snaps last year. DJ Chark was supposed to be a Band-Aid, as Jamison Williams was their first-round pick as that kind of deep threat last year. TJ Hawkinson, they openly were willing to get rid of him. They traded him away last year. Evan Brown, another one of these guys that got a lot of snaps last year because of injuries, but they feel like they have better players on the roster coming back healthy. I think Jamal Williams, DeAndre Swift, they obviously feel like they could have upgraded with those players, and I think they did. Getting David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. Jeff Okudah, again, they trade him away and feel like they upgraded via free agency. Mike Hughes was always kind of a Band-Aid at cornerback. Deshaun Elliott, I think, was a decent role signing last year, but nobody they felt like, or not somebody they felt like was a long-term starter. Amani Oruwariye, who this staff inherited, they get rid of him. Michael Brocker is a veteran that had definitely flamed out, and they weren't getting anything from him last year. So it's a large list of names, but really nobody you're all that concerned about losing. I think Jamal Williams as a locker room presence will be missed. TJ Hawkinson, we'll see. It is interesting. The biggest piece they got from the Vikings for Hawkinson was a second-round pick, and they go and spend an early second-round pick on Sam Laporta. So, yes, Laporta will be cheaper, but they're going to have to see Laporta climb up and play at that level that Hawkinson did if they're not going to regret trading him away. And then, Jamison Williams getting suspended definitely threw a wrench in their plans a little bit here. I list him, ironically, as both a departure and an addition. I didn't really know how to detail this, but I felt it was important to list him. He's going to be suspended for the first 6 weeks of this season, but at the same time, he only played 78 snaps for them last year. So we'll get to Jamison later in the video. But as far as the additions that they made, it's a very healthy list. And again, I'm not trying to say this team had a bad offseason. There's a lot of good players coming into Detroit. and a lot of them justify a lot of the hype that this team's getting. So they do sign Marvin Jones kind of as a reaction, it felt like, to the Jameson Williams suspension. We mentioned Sam Laporta, a big second-round pick. Going to be a lot of pressure on him to step up at tight end. The two running backs, David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs. They do get Hal Vaitai back from injury, hopefully, coming back from a back injury. They're hoping he can be their starting right guard this year and stay healthy. On the defensive side of the ball, they spend a first-round pick on a linebacker in Jack Campbell. They also spent decent money in the secondary, bringing in Cameron Sutton from Pittsburgh, along with Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, a hybrid defensive back for them, and drafting a very similar defensive back in Brian Branch, kind of that hybrid slot corner safety type. They love their flexibility in the secondary, and they get a lot of that with those three additions. They also get Tracy Walker back, who played the first 3 games of the year and then missed the rest of the season. Another versatile guy that can play free safety and strong safety. So really hoping for an improved secondary this year in Detroit. Got to give kickers some love, too. They do swap Michael Badgley, who was just okay for them last year, bringing in Riley Patterson, who was pretty good for the Jags last year, so hopefully going to be a little bit upgraded there. A pretty healthy list of smaller additions for the Lions as well. They spend a third-round pick on Hendon Hooker, a fascinating quarterback that we'll get to talk about here momentarily. They just recently acquired Denzel Mims, who's been stashed in the Jets behind a deep wide receiver group and bad quarterback plays, so hoping to bring his upside back out as a former second-round pick. They spent a 7th-rounder on Antoine Green out of UNC, some veteran offensive line depth, bringing Graham Glasgow home, also signing Jermaine Ifedi, and then they draft Colby Sorstal in the 5th round, and then they add a couple of interior defensive line pieces, Broderick Martin out of Western Kentucky in the 3rd round, and then Christian Covington, a veteran rotational piece. So a lot of turnover, a lot of new bodies here in Detroit. But I do think the turnover is all for the better. As we look at their positional movement chart, I don't have a single position getting downgraded here. The only one you could kind of argue is tight end. I just leave it as neutral. Kind of depends how you feel about how to weigh in TJ Hawkinson being a midseason trade. Like, obviously Hawkinson is better right now than Sam Laporta. But other than that, nothing was downgraded here. I think where I raised some questions is where they upgraded and how much they invested in upgrading those positions and if that was really necessary. Running back, they spent a high first-round pick on Jahmyr Gibbs, ship off DeAndre Swift. You know, they go from Jamal Williams to David Montgomery. I see those as incremental upgrades, enough to list it as an upgrade. But, man, they sunk a lot into improving the running back room. Linebacker, same deal. They bring back Alex Anzalone and then spend a first-round pick, a high top 20 first-round pick on Jack Campbell after Malcolm Rodriguez looked awesome last year. I still believe in Derek Barnes. So, like, that was like, okay, yeah, linebacker got upgraded. That's the running back of the defense. I do love what they did in the secondary between free agency and the draft. I do see both the cornerback and the safety groups as significantly upgraded. And then the offensive line is also going to get listed as a slight upgrade because of the return of Hal Vaitai. Everything else remained neutral. And to me, that's another source of, like, I don't want to say pessimism for Detroit because this is not pessimism. It's just like hesitation and, for lack of a better term, underwhelmingness, because still listed as neutral there is the defensive line, quarterback, wide receiver, all groups that I felt like are game-changing positions that this team maybe could have gone a different direction to raise the floor a little bit more on a team that, as we'll see throughout this video, I don't know how high their ceiling truly is after, in my mind, a fairly safe offseason, an offseason that reminded me, and this is where I might lose some Lions fans, but I'm just being honest, like, and I know there's a lot of Lions fans that feel this way, this felt like a John Gruden offseason. This felt like some of those really bad Pete Carroll Seahawks offseasons where they bought in a little bit too much to their own culture, their own hype, and went against the grain in terms of adding high investments at critical positions where they kind of needed it to take that next step. So we still have a long way to go in this, but that is just kind of this cloud over my thoughts on the Detroit Lions. But I'll leave it at that. I won't keep droning on about the offseason. Let's move forward and change the tone a little bit and talk about this coaching staff, which is absolutely phenomenal. And if you want to sit there and say, I will take Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes and Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn's opinions on how they wanted to go about this offseason over this idiot YouTuber, sure, fair game. Like, I freaking love these guys. They rank really high for me. We rank all these coaches. We rank the coaching culture all against the rest of the league. And Detroit is up there towards the top 10 across the board, with the exception of defensive coaching, which I still think is really good with Aaron Glenn. But tier 2 for overall coaching culture, where Dan Campbell has come in and, kind of got laughed at the very beginning with the kneecap biting and, the 6 Starbucks drinks coming into the office in the morning and the push-ups before practice. But man, it has really permeated throughout this team, and there is complete buy-in to a level that is rare to see throughout the league. You look at Ben Johnson as the offensive coordinator coming back. We didn't list there with the positional movement, but the fact that they were able to stay neutral at coaching is probably the biggest win that the Lions had this offseason, because Ben Johnson's play calling was some of the best in the league last year, really up there with Andy Reid, Kyle Shanahan, Nick Sirianni. And the fact that they didn't lose him to a head coaching offer was a miracle. They got one more year with him, because I can promise you he gone after this year, but he's awesome. And then Aaron Glenn, who I've had a lot of respect for since he got to Detroit, since he was in New Orleans. I've really praised the New Orleans Dennis Allen mentality of a defense, and I think it's taken some time for Aaron Glenn to implement that in Detroit, longer than the offense took to get their scheme going. But you look at what they accomplished in the second half of the year. I think he's building a lot of momentum into year 3 for him in Detroit. I do want to, give each guy a little bit more of their dues here. So Dan Campbell, as a head coach, ranks 12th for me in the NFL, and he's climbing. I had him 15th last year, which seemed high, but it definitely played out. And I think this year definitely can get into the top 10 head coach conversation if Detroit really does meet those expectations that everyone's setting for him. I already talked about how he is as a culture guy, but it's not just that. Like, he's a good offensive mind. I think Ben Johnson does a lot of the heavy lifting with their rankings here as a tier 2 pass game and run game coached team. But Dan Quinn does kind of steer the ship, if you will. He knows what the type of mentality he wants this team to be. I think he does have a firm understanding of the run game and how to balance power and trap and counter, even wide zone. He comes from Sean Payton's offense that, as we just talked about with the Broncos deep dive a couple episodes ago, Sean Payton's always known how to vary up the run game, and we've seen that same balance schematically in Detroit. He's also one of the best tight ends coaches in the league. I think it's a big reason why they felt comfortable getting cheaper and faster at tight end, going to get Sam Laporta. Going to be curious to see how his development goes. And then you got Ben Johnson, who I definitely already raved about, and the balance that this team has in the run game with all of those different schemes that I just described. A big part of that is Ben Johnson, but I think you really feel Ben Johnson's impact on the passing game as well. And he just runs a very balanced pro-style offense and is just excellent at knowing when to pull what levers. He was most recently with Darrell Bevell, who is much more of that traditional, I don't want to say stagnant pro-style scheme, but when you compare it to like the modern pro spread Andy Reid stuff and certainly the Kyle Shanahan stuff, it is a little bit more like standard pro-style stuff in terms of your basic passing concepts and really using, like, I guess I'll just say stagnant play action as opposed to moving play action, if that makes sense. Like play action off of duo or power instead of wide zone. So your quarterback is standing in the pocket as opposed to more of a play action boot type of deal. That's more standard in Detroit, though they do love their play action. I also think Ben Johnson is like really awesome with trick plays. I mean, they come up with some crazy shit. Johnson just feels like the kind of guy that is staying late after practice watching like Navy and Air Force and Wichita State. Do they have a football team? I don't know. Any Wichita State Shocker fans can tell me if they have a football program, but you get the point. Like a guy that is just diving deep into the ranks to pull out crazy plays that he can deploy at the right moments in games. And that matters for a team that has Jared Goff at quarterback. So he really is one of the exciting just pieces in the NFL. He will be a head coach before too long, but for him in Detroit this year, he's going to be a massive asset for the Lions, just as he was last season. And then Aaron Glenn, I feel like we covered pretty well, but just a little bit more on what his scheme is going to look like. It's very similar to what we've seen in New Orleans, where they do, in their heart of hearts, they want to play aggressive. They want to play press man coverage. We saw that last year, but they just didn't have the bodies to do it. They get rid of pretty much everybody in that secondary, at least at cornerback, bring in a bunch of other guys that they think can run press man coverage much better, and I think they're going to get back to it a lot more. They want a zero blitz. They want to play cover one. There will, of course, be a healthy balance of cover three and a variety of different zones to mix things up. But in a league where seemingly everybody wants to run the Fangio stuff and give up everything underneath and, force the other team to just make mistakes, Detroit wants to get in your face and force those mistakes, even if it compromises, leaving them susceptible to more chunk plays. So it is a trade-off, but I respect the mentality, and I think it is perfect for Detroit as a whole with, the type of culture that they want to be. We definitely saw this team with that buy-in a lot more into the second half of the season. So I rave about this coaching staff. While they have good roster talent, this to me was the key reason why Detroit came on so late and why a lot of that hype is justified. Training camps are here and football season is just around the corner, but at Underdog Fantasy, you don't have to wait until late August or early September to draft your favorite players and compete for huge cash payouts. In fact, Underdog's Best Ball Mania 4 is the biggest fantasy football competition of all time with, wait for it, $15 million in cash winnings. Best ball is draft, set it, and forget it. No waivers, no trades. Underdog will retroactively give you your best lineup every week, which means no sitting there on Mondays, making your friends act like they care about which players you left on the bench that week. I've loved filling out my best ball teams this summer, and I know you will too. And right now, if you sign up using promo code TFG at Underdog Fantasy, not only will you support this channel in a big, big way, but they will match up to $100 on your first deposit. That's 4 free entries into the Best Ball Mania competition or a season's long worth of entries into daily pick'em contests, which are the best way to enjoy NFL games even more with a shot of winning up to 20 times your entry. So that is a match of up to $100 on your first deposit when you sign up right now at Underdog Fantasy. But now it's time to get into the roster breakdown. And we are going to start by talking about the quarterback room, where Detroit ranks 14th in the NFL with Jared Goff. And I really struggle with this one, man, because it's like, do you want the good news or do you want the bad news first? And on the plus side, on the good side of the coin, good on Detroit, good on Jared Goff for getting back to this point where we are ranking Jared Goff as the 14th best quarterback in the NFL with that group with guys like Kirk Cousins, like what we've seen in years past from guys like Derek Carr and Ryan Tannehill, where you have a good NFL quarterback with real tools to throw from the pocket that in any given season with the right surrounding cast, Jared Goff can play close to a top 10 quarterback level. Now, his skill set is that of a system quarterback. There's no way around it. He is one of these quarterbacks that his play is going to be a direct product of the pass protection, the play calling, and the playmakers around him. And there's, in some scenarios, that's an okay thing. If you have an elite defense, if you have elite playmakers, that can work. Does Detroit have that? They're trying to build towards that, but no, they don't have that now. What Detroit did have that a lot of teams stuck with a system quarterback in purgatory is a top draft pick and another first round pick. And that's when I get to the downside of the coin here. And I don't want to drone on about this, but they made a conscious decision that, okay, the NFC North stinks right now. The NFC is fairly open right now. Let's go for it. But they didn't even take great pass rushers and receivers. They took a running back and a linebacker. You know what I'm saying? So, like, this is where it all comes back to me with Detroit, is their draft strategy and their decision to recommit to Jared Goff. And I just question, can this get this regime where they want to go? Because they had an opportunity to trade up in the draft to get Anthony Richardson, and they chose to stand by Jared Goff and turn those picks into a running back and a linebacker. I think that speaks for itself, and that's my criticism of the decision here. But where they are right now, they are just fine at quarterback. Jared Goff played really well last year, and that's kind of a part of the problem too, is he's going to continue to play well because I do believe that Detroit is building something nice here. The thing is, like, you're just trying to get the highest percentage chance at winning a Super Bowl, especially in Detroit's case where they've taken this long rebuild approach, and I really felt like they were building up to this offseason to maybe make that push for a franchise-altering quarterback. They didn't do that, and now it's like, when are they going to be able to go head-to-head with the Pat Mahomes and Josh Allens of the world? Like, yeah, the NFC North looks bad right now, but if Jordan Love and Justin Fields hit, you could very quickly have the fourth best quarterback in the division, like this year. So that's my criticism of Detroit, and where I see some lack of upside is they are going to be very, very dependent on everything else around Jared Goff, just as we saw with the Rams, and be very surprised if that's not the case moving into the future. And I've defended Jared Goff. Like, go back to previous deep dives. I've raved about that one Monday night performance against the Vikings, one of the best quarterback performances I've ever seen. Like, if he has it all around him, he can drop dimes down the field. He was a first overall pick for a reason. He's not a bad quarterback. It is possible to win a Super Bowl with him, but he's one of these guys that the second anything goes wrong, he is one of the least athletic quarterbacks in the league. He doesn't have good pocket presence. He's not going to improvise and add on top of the structure of the offense. And as we know, that's extremely important if you want to get over the hump to be a Super Bowl team. And I don't know that that's ever going to happen with Jared Goff here. And honestly, I have some added criticisms about them taking Hendon Hooker in the third round. It really just depends how they view him. You know, if they see him as a high upside backup, if Goff goes down for 3 weeks, he can step in and keep their season afloat. I'm game for Hendon Hooker in the third round because I see him as a high floor quarterback prospect, very similar to Desmond Ridder coming out, except he's 3 years older and coming off a torn ACL. But a guy that can run the structure of the offense, is a good enough athlete to extend plays when he sees it, but he does not have a good pocket feel. That's the biggest reason I don't love Hendon Hooker's upside. Accuracy's okay for Hendon Hooker. But if they see him as more than just a backup, which I imagine they probably do, I'm worried that it's going to be 2 years of Goff, playoff contention, but not Super Bowl contention. Goff's contract's up. They decide that Hendon Hooker looked good in practice for the last 2 years, and they're going to go a season seeing what Hendon Hooker has at 28 years old. And I feel like that's adding yet another year of quarterback purgatory that's going to be difficult for them to get out of because they're not going to be picking high in any given draft. So we're not going to belabor that point any further. They rank 14th in quarterback this season, which in the landscape of this NFC is obviously more than good enough. And I expect Jared Goff to play at the same level he did last year, which was enough to have this offense humming pretty good last year. And I do recognize that. So I'm not trying to say it's all bad here. I just think there are limitations that they have put on themselves for the future now at kind of a fork in the road moment for this franchise. And we won't know how that plays out for years. But they also have Nate Sudfeld as a backup quarterback here. He's going to just kind of hang on until Hendon Hooker can be healthy coming off that ACL injury. But, Sudfeld's a career backup. They also bring in undrafted pickup Adrian Martinez, who I swear to God played college football for 35 years in the Big Ten. But, that tells me that he's just not very good. I didn't even have him on my draft board, but maybe he surprises, I guess. So let's move on and talk about the weaponry here. And it's another one of these groups where this is a series where I'm not giving specific benefit of the doubt to any one team. And the benefit of the doubt I do give to a team is reflected by the very high coach and culture grade that I gave to the Lions, right? But I believe in this Lions group of weapons, but there is undoubtedly a large list of question marks here that leads to them ranking 27th. And it's a tough balance. Like, I really, like I said, I don't want to have a negative undertone with this group. I think in time, even by season's end this year, like that's in a best case scenario for this team, honestly, is by season's end, this is a special group that they shatter 27th. I mean, the potential is way higher than that. But just as we've seen with other teams in this series, like you have essentially 3 out of your 5 key playmakers here, and certainly 3 of your top 4 are rookie presences. Because Jameson Williams is basically a rookie. He has 1 career reception. He's going to be suspended for 6 games, by the way. First 6 games of the year. That factors into the 27th ranking. You got Sam Laporta at tight end. He's a rookie, 2nd-round tight end. Doesn't always work out. And then Jahmyr Gibbs. Like we'll get to Gibbs in a minute. I'm optimistic there, but it's a young group. It's an unproven group, just as we've said it as some of these other younger groups, and that's where the ranking comes from. But I do really see the vision with this group. It's just a little frustrating that the Jameson suspension came in at like literally the worst time, because they need him based on the roster around here, and they're really trying to capitalize on this specific season where the NFC North is trying to figure itself out, where the NFC is trying to figure itself out. You know, if they're going to make a run, this is kind of the year they're hoping that happens. So you want this to happen sooner rather than later, right? But you got Amon-Ra St. Brown, man. He is, if you count Cooper Kupp as a true slot receiver, Amon-Ra St. Brown is the 2nd best slot in the league. If you don't count Cooper Kupp that way, then Amon-Ra is the best slot in the league. Now, there's limitations to a guy that has 4.6 speed and can't line up outside. And, you know, when Jameson's out, you're not going to be able to put Amon-Ra St. Brown at X wide receiver or flanker and take the top off the defense. There's not a whole lot of explosive plays from Amon-Ra St. Brown. But as a slot guy, as a complete nuisance in the short to intermediate game that helps you stay ahead of the chains by, you know, not just being reliable and a quick separator in quick game, but someone that leaves you with less 2nd and 4s because he's so good at getting those extra 3 or 4 yards after the catch and turning it into a new set of chains. He helps in the screen game, whether you're throwing him the ball where he is awesome, or if you want him to block from the slot, he's great. He'll help your run game because he can come down and block from a wide tight end spot and like take linebackers out. His physicality is insane. You know, really his physical and mental presence embodies Dan Campbell on the field. So like they love Amon-Ra St. Brown. I guess there's not really a whole lot else to say about him. But as you look at the rest of the group, that's where some of those questions, really all those questions, come in. I talked a little bit about Jameson Williams, where, okay, so he comes into the league with a torn ACL, gets on the field late as a rotational piece, ends up with really 2 career receptions. One was called back for a penalty on the offensive line against the Packers. But you are talking about a year 2 player with 2 career receptions that basically the entire vertical passing game is depending on, because DJ Chark's gone. You look at the rest of these groups, the rest of this group, you know, Marvin Jones, Josh Reynolds, those are placeholder wide receiver 4 types. Yeah, they can step in and, you know, maybe be a 4th target and a quasi starter in 11 personnel, work the sidelines a little bit in the intermediate game. Not bad receivers, but nobody that brings any excitement here. Khalif Raymond has a little bit of juice, a little bit redundant with Amon-Ra St. Brown as kind of that slot separator, but is a good combo with Ben Johnson as a gadget guy. He's basically Isaiah McKenzie as that gadget guy, not someone you're really counting on as a full-time starter. Again, especially with Amon-Ra St. Brown in there in the slot. They bring in Denzel Mims, you know, a bust for the Jets, but a good dart throw. We'll see what Mims can do. Can he be rejuvenized in this culture? Definitely has upside. Like, got my eyes on him. You're not counting on that. That's why, you know, the Jets were going to cut him, and they're like, hey, we'll throw you, you know, late day 3 pick or whatever. Antoine Green, a similar bucket, guy that was a vertical presence at UNC, but was a 7th round pick for a reason. You stack all this up, and you can start to see the pressure that they're putting on Jameson Williams, and I think that him getting suspended for the first 6 games of the season, like I said, just could not have come at the worst time. But there is very much reason to believe that he can step back in week 7 and hit the ground running. There's nothing wrong with his route running. He tracks the deep ball well. We already saw it in spurts last year. And with DJ Chark gone, that opportunity is very clear. So I'm still optimistic about Jameson Williams, though the suspension is a frustrating setback. But there is a lot of truth to like availability is the best ability, because it's not so simple to just take a guy off the street or you know, someone that wasn't a part of your team and just plug him in and it's just easy go, hit the ground running, automatic, especially for a guy with 2 career receptions. So like we'll very much see what Jameson Williams does this year. There will be weeks, I'm sure, especially in the last 2 months of the year though, where he's putting up 4 catches for 160 yards and 2 touchdowns. Like his speed, his upside is insane. Between him and Amon-Ra St. Brown, you realistically could have, by the end of this season, a Deshaun Jackson plus Wes Welker type of combo between those 2 guys. And obviously that will exceed alone the 27th group of weapons. But we cannot just assume, I think, that Jameson Williams will be great. And the suspension does factor in there. That's a third of the season. 6 key games where they're going to have to make it work with Marvin Jones and Josh Reynolds and Khalif Raymond. A lot of that sort of unprovenness continues with your other 2 focal points of this passing game. Sam Laporta, 2nd round pick, and Jahmyr Gibbs, a 1st round pick. And, you know, Laporta, it was an interesting pick. I was definitely surprised they took him over like Michael Mayer or even like Luke Musgrave. But you do see how Laporta fits here. Just, you know, Iowa players tend to get that tag of being blue-collar, no-nonsense, professional types that are just going to step in and go to work. And I see that fit. And, you know, he's a good athlete. He's got upside here. He's really good after the catch. He's a good route runner. It's not that he necessarily showed bad hands, but I think the contested catch stuff is something he's going to have to prove at the next level. He's a good run blocker, too. That's what you expect out of Iowa. There really is no reason to believe he can't step in and be a quality starting tight end as a rookie, other than the fact that that almost never happens, right? Like, the odds are against Sam Laporta to be a really solid tight end as a rookie. If it's going to happen, it's probably going to happen here, but another player that I just can't rank that high coming into the year or be disingenuous to the series. Now, with Jahmyr Gibbs as the other kind of last, I guess, question mark, it's not so much a question of the talent. Like, I'll just say this, say what you want about he shouldn't have been the 12th pick in the draft, and I certainly don't think he should have, but I think he's a top 10 receiving back right away. The route running, the hands, the speed, very minimal questions about what he can do as a receiving back. The question is, can a receiving back truly change the landscape of a group of weapons? And that's going to be really on the coaching staff. You know, when the Jags took Travis Etienne, the idea was, oh, he's going to be part receiver. The Packers have always been like, yeah, we can skim at wide receiver because we have Aaron Jones. And then those guys always leave a little bit to be desired. They aren't actually receivers, right? Like the idea of, oh, we can have, you know, disguise personnel and we can put Jahmyr Gibbs out there as a wide receiver and he's part receiver, part running back. It's like, no, turns out Jahmyr Gibbs is really good as a receiving back, but he's not even what Khalif Raymond is as a wide receiver, for example, if that makes sense. So it's just difficult to be a true game changer as a receiving back. I would argue only Christian McCaffrey is that. Maybe Saquon. But to expect Jahmyr Gibbs to be Christian McCaffrey as a rookie is bold to say the least. And the other thing is, like, he's not even really the starter here. Like, obviously I list him as the most critical receiving back. That's why they drafted him in the first round. They better give him the most targets out of these running backs. But it's going to be a balance for them. Like, okay, when he's in there, is this a tell that it's going to be a pass? And how do they sprinkle him in with how much I think they're going to want to use David Montgomery as a running back as well? Like, there is going to be a lot to balance there with Jahmyr Gibbs. I mean, hell, this team found a lot of success moving Amon-Ra St. Brown back there into the backfield at running back and creating personnel issues. And how much of that do they have to balance with and potentially lose that was an impact last year? And we're just going to have to wait and find out just how big of an impact he can be. It's not impossible that he can be like some crazy Christian McCaffrey level impact on the receiving game, and that he can be the one that provides the big plays until Jameson Williams gets back. But for all the reasons I've mentioned, it's just difficult to get that from your running back. So I think you can see between Sam Laporta and Jameson Williams questions, and just a kind of motley crew of mediocrity beyond that, trying to fill in for Jameson at wide receiver, you can start to see where that 27th ranking comes from. I fully believe that it's going to exceed this at some point this year. It's just a matter of when. As far as any other bodies we didn't talk about, you got some receivers that saw the field last year: Tom Kennedy, Trinity Benson. I don't think they make it. I think this group is deep as is. You do have some interesting tight end group. I think a big part of them moving on from TJ Hawkinson was they just want some athletes in this room, and they're going to pair them with Dan Campbell and hope to get that development out of them. And, Brock Wright is a really good raw athlete out of Notre Dame that's becoming less and less raw each year. He played okay last year, and as a tight end too, I think he's solid. I think he's solid enough that I don't even know if Laporta is guaranteed to get all of the snaps, at least early in the year. And then James Mitchell as well is one of those guys that if he was able to play healthy his final year of college, he probably goes a round or two earlier in the draft. He is a full-size, solid athlete and showed some nice flashes when he got on the field late last season. So they're developing those guys, and it's a physically talented group. It's just a matter of getting the skill and the coaching to catch up with those physical tools, and it can be a really nice group of tight ends down the road someday. Shane Zylstra caught like 4 touchdowns last year, but that's about it. And then the running backs behind Gibbs, they're gonna get Gibbs going as much as possible, but David Montgomery is a good kind of classic. Throw him a screen, throw him a check down. He can do a little bit after the catch, but not overly dynamic as an athlete. Justin Jackson can do some stuff as well, but obviously the receiving back situation is much more about Jahmyr Gibbs. So that rounds out the weaponry in the quarterback room, and they definitely have everything they need to at some point here be a really good passing game. Jared Goff showed last year he's good enough to run the show, and then it's more of a matter of when, not if, with these receivers. But it kind of, I'm not going to say it has to be this year that all these young weapons click into place, but you kind of made your own bed, sticking with Jared Goff, admitting, we can get the job done in the current landscape of the NFC. Well, you need these weapons to be great to elevate Jared Goff if you want to be a Super Bowl team. And if you got to wait an extra year or two until that happens, well, all of a sudden the NFC might not be as big of a shit show. And without Ben Johnson, and who knows what else can change with the rest of the team with contracts and free agency and injuries, you're sitting there with a whole different perspective on having Jared Goff as your quarterback and if that's good enough. So it's very much a wait and see group, and we'll wait and see how this goes. But now let's talk about these running backs a little bit more as real runners of the football. And honestly, man, I think people are sleeping a little bit on what David Montgomery is going to bring for this team. It's a big reason why the Lions rank just inside the top half for running back at 16th. Love the signing, love the contract they gave him. I know Jahmyr Gibbs has the explosiveness and the speed and the newfound draft pedigree, but if Detroit showed us anything last year, it's that they want a grinder on early downs. They want to run the ball. They want a power back, and that is not Jahmyr Gibbs. That is David Montgomery. He is an upgrade to me from what they had in Jamal Williams last year, because he brings pretty much all the same vision and ball security and reliability as a runner that Jamal Williams brought, but an extra gear into the second level. Not that he's fast, but he's got excellent contact balance. He's got a deceptively good jump cut to make linebackers and closing safeties miss, and he's good at changing angles to create breakaway runs. He's not fast, but he can clear into the second level and give you some chunk runs. So I think he's going to open up some explosiveness to this run game that they didn't really have in Jamal Williams last year, and that kind of adds a little extra begging of the question as to why they felt the need to spend the 12th overall pick on Jahmyr Gibbs, especially when they had a capable scat back in DeAndre Swift here that they shipped off for a bag of peanuts. But Not that Gibbs isn't super talented. I think his upside is like super high. Somewhere is a cross between like Aaron Jones and Jamal Charles, I think is what I had in my draft guide. He's got good vision. He's super light on his feet. He's got legit speed to, create chunk runs. There might be one or two on the season. If you're lucky, you get 4 like breakaway big 50+ yard touchdown runs. That'd be pretty damn rare, but I wouldn't say it's impossible. But like, he's not going to get a lot of carries here. I really don't think so. If you're lucky, you get like 4, but I don't think he's going to get a lot of carries. So that becomes even more unlikely. Like, I really think Jahmyr Gibbs is only going to get like 5 or 6 carries a game here. And it's just going to be tough to really make much of an impact at all and show much at all as a running back, where I think they're just going to kind of save him for the receiving game. And for underdog fantasy, if you're playing best ball drafts or getting ready for your home leagues even, Jahmyr Gibbs is going in like the middle of the 3rd round as the 12th running back? What? I think that's insane. David Montgomery's going in the 8th round. Like, I would bet a burrito that David Montgomery has more fantasy points than Jahmyr Gibbs this year. I would bet a lot more than a burrito. I mean, Gibbs is going ahead of guys that are going to have a much bigger workload. Najee Harris, Travis Etienne, Aaron Jones, Alexander Madison, Miles Sanders. All these guys are going to have a bigger workload than Jahmyr Gibbs, which just makes it all very interesting that they took him. But like, I do think the talent is there. I liked him more in a wide zone blocking scheme where they can really get him on the edge, and I'm sure they'll run more wide zone with him. But again, does that become a tell? Is it like, okay, Jahmyr Gibbs is out here, this is either a pass or they're going to do some kind of run to the outside? It's just tough, man. I like Jahmyr Gibbs as a player a lot. I like the Lions a lot as a team. It's just like, why did it have to be the 12th overall pick? Why? I don't understand it. Definitely makes it a good running back room, though, for what it's worth. They got good depth as well. Craig Reynolds, tough dude, can get the job done in an emergency situation. Justin Jackson, light feet, decent all-around player, just lacks some of that high-end juice to take the next step, which he struggled to do throughout his career. Do got to keep an eye on Mohamed Ibrahim, man. If you could ask me what's the best culture fit for Mo Ibrahim, this is the Detroit Lions, man. He is an absolute grinder, elite character guy. One of the more productive backs in college football over the last few years. I've watched a lot of his game as a Minnesota Gophers fan. And if he can stay healthy, he's an NFL-capable running back. And they found themselves a steal. But that's the thing. He can't really stay healthy. So I hope he makes this team and can carve out a nice little short-lived NFL career. Still got Jamar Jefferson as well. Liked him as a prospect, but I think there's something missing there. They don't seem to be too high on Jamar. But yeah, they rank 16th. If Jahmyr Gibbs comes out and shows that he's like Aaron Jones right away, this can easily be a top 10 group. But with a lack of carries, I think we might be sitting back waiting a little bit until we view Gibbs as like some dominant back. And we know David Montgomery is very good, very solid, but he's not an elite back or anything like that. Still a group that's going to contribute to this being a very good run game. They are, however, one of 3 teams that gets absolutely no multiplier from their quarterback. That's the Jared Goff factor there, I suppose. Shouldn't come as too much of a surprise. He's one of the least mobile, athletic quarterbacks in the league. Now, let's talk about this offensive line, and we can kind of take a sigh of relief, at least as far as the offense is concerned, because this is an awesome group, and they rank 4th in pass protection, 4th in run blocking. This is where really their offense is fueled. I mean, just such a good group across the board. At left tackle, you got Taylor Decker, who's super solid. If you want to knock on him, it's, he's not the most elite athlete. He is a taller tackle. He doesn't always get dominating leverage as a run blocker, but he's got good technique. He's willing. He's a good run blocker and a great pass protector. Left guard is kind of the opposite. Jonah Jackson is an athlete. He loves to run block. He always did coming out of Ohio State, but he's kind of their weak link. The pass protection just hasn't really come along for Jonah Jackson. It is a contract year for him. We'll see if, kind of reminds me of like Nate Davis for Tennessee last year, who made some nice strides and got a big contract with the Bears. We'll see what happens with Jonah Jackson. I think they're holding out to see if that side of the game can come along for him, but he absolutely helps the run blocking. Then you got Frank Ragnow. I do think he's lost the throne to Creed Humphrey as the best center in the NFL. Well, and it's easy to forget what Jason Kelsey's doing in Philadelphia right now, too. But Ragnow's not far behind him. He's a total mauler in the run game, people mover, a wrestler that just gets leverage, can drive guys back. He's athletic to reach block. He will let them run wide zone if they want to. Even if he's not the most elite athlete, he can do it. And then I wouldn't say he's quite what he is as a run blocker, as a pass blocker. There are losses on film. I'll just say that, but it's nothing you're concerned about. In fact, you're very happy with him in pass protection. And then this is where the group should be improved from where they were last year. Hal Vaitai stepping in as they're letting Brown go to Seattle. Vaitai actually in 2021 played really well at right guard. He was a tackle that got a big contract here in Detroit from the previous regime. And that was a mistake, but I like Hal Vaitai as a guard. It's just his athleticism and his foot speed as a tackle is kind of a liability. But, you know, he showed in his first year as a right guard for Detroit, like he can move people off the ball. He's 330 pounds. He has tackle feet, like, or at least enough that he has played tackle in the NFL. You know what I'm saying? Like, it translates well to the inside. Still just not the stickiest pass blocker, but I think he's average overall. Is coming off a back injury, so he's got to get healthy and stay healthy. I think he's healthy at the moment, but got to stay healthy. Overall should be an upgrade. But if he can't stay healthy, it is worth noting they bring back Graham Glasgow after his stint with the Broncos. And while he's not the player he was when he left, he's still an awesome backup, a swingman on the inside that can play center. He can play either guard spot. And if Vaitai goes down, I think Glasgow is still an upgrade, especially in pass protection from what they had in Brown at right guard last year. So they've really solidified that right guard spot. And then Penei Sewell just continues to show that his arrow is pointing up. Obviously, that top 10 pick a couple years ago is such an absurd run blocker. He's so fast off the ball. He's a tenacious run blocker. He's got that dickhead mentality. Genuinely already one of the best run blocking right tackles in the NFL. Pass protection has been growing. I mean, he was not really polished coming into the NFL out of Oregon, but he's definitely impressed, and you can expect that he's going to continue to grow. And, you know, especially with Tristan Wirfs sliding over to left tackle, with Lane Johnson getting another year older, there's a point in the future where you can see a route for Penei Sewell to becoming the best right tackle in the NFL. He's getting more comfortable there too. Like, he was a left tackle coming out. That was something that was talked about, is he comfortable at left? Seems like he's getting used to the footwork and the technique translating over to that side just fine. So obviously a very good group. You also have, we mentioned Glasgow as depth, but you also bring in Germain Ifedi, who's fine as a sixth man. He's started a lot of games in the last 5 years. He's incrementally grown. You know, back when he was a full-time starter, before he developed a little bit, he was a huge liability for the Seahawks, but he's bounced around and he's decent depth. You're all right with that, backing up Taylor Decker and Penei Sewell. Then it's really just a bunch of developmental types. Matt Nelson, Oben Eze. They're, you know, hoping to strike gold with the rest of the tackle depth. Guard depth as well. Logan Stenberg's been a turnstile in pass protection when they've asked him to play. He is a mauler in the run game. He'd be your best option if you had to go any deeper than Graham Glasgow. They did draft Colby Sorstel in the 5th round, who I'll just have to trust their eyes for this position. I didn't get to Sorstel. We'll see what he can do, along with some other depth there in Awasika, Ross Pierschbacher. Very limited playing time for Awasika, and Pierschbacher was kind of a high floor, low ceiling guy out of Alabama that hasn't played yet. So yeah, you are hoping that you don't have to go any further than 7 deep, as pretty much every offensive line in the NFL hopes. But, you know, you could do a lot worse in terms of depth than Ifedi and Glasgow, and the starting 5 is one of the best in the league. Again, they rank 4th for overall offensive line, 4th in pass blocking, 4th in run blocking. As far as the contribution to the run blocking from the skill blockers, Amon-Ra St. Brown is a menace of a run blocker. Beyond that, it's we'll see what Sam Laporta can do in his rookie season. That'd be the biggest guy you keep an eye on. Jason Kambinda, converted fullback from linebacker, is a decent fullback. Marvin Jones and Josh Reynolds are rather inconsequential run blockers on the outside. So it's a decent group, factoring in St. Brown to help out with the run game. But that wraps up the offense. A lot to talk about here, but overall they rank 15th in passing game, 7th in run game. Despite the questions, like, this is a super well coached team. Offensive line's great. You know what you're getting from the quarterback. It really just comes down to those weapons and how quickly do they settle in. I mean, the 14th offense is still very good, but if Jameson Williams hits the ground running and Sam Laporta is a good tight end as a rookie, this is quite clearly like at least a top 12 passing game, if not more. And that's when you're starting to look at the Lions hitting those high expectations, right? So very excited to see this Lions offense regardless. But I will not lie, as we switch to the defensive side of the ball, some of my reservations for how highly perceived the Lions are heading into the year do come back to this defense as well. Not that I think it's a bad group, but there is a lack of star talent with this group. And that starts up front as we take a look at this defensive line. It's a fun group. There's a lot of names here, but they only rank 22nd in pass rush, 24th in D-line run defense. They've got a lot to prove until anybody's afraid of this Detroit Lions pass rush. I think you got to start with Aiden Hutchinson off the edge. He was every bit as advertised. The versatility of pass rush skill sets, can win with power, can win with different, spin moves and rips, and just such a polished pass rusher coming out. Reminded me so much of Max Crosby, and I think we saw the beginnings of that. I think the arrow is pointing up, and I don't have a bad word to say about Aiden Hutchinson. Was the right pick, always was for them. Such a great culture fit. He defends the run well too. He's got really good instincts to slip into the backfield. He can drop into coverage and pick you off. Like, just such a complete player that, if he can be better than he was last year, then you can start to talk about him as a potentially elite pass rusher. I don't think we're quite there yet. 61st in pass rush win rate, 53 pressures on the season, very good season. But again, we're looking for that game-breaking pass rusher here. He isn't quite that yet, but with the way he came on at the end of last year, that's the guy you're looking at. Like, can you provide some bit of a fear factor for this D-line? I don't think you can answer yes yet, but there's a little bit of hope that maybe he could. Beyond that, there's nobody quite at that level. Let's stick with the edge. So, who do you want to say is the next edge in? That's the question, right? I think the best edge in is James Houston, who's really a designated pass rusher. He's 6'1", 245 pounds, really unique build, small school guy that you pair that with his frame and just wasn't on anybody's radar, but he was on the Detroit Lions radar, and that's a credit to this front office. And I was excited to dial up Lions tape because I really hadn't watched his film. I know he had 8 sacks or whatever it was, but only on like 90 snaps or something. So I was excited to see, like, is this legit? And I think yes and no. Like, anytime you have a player that ends up with 8 sacks on 90 snaps, you know that they're going to need to get a lot more snaps than that for the next time they want to get to 8 snaps, for example. But there is a reason why it came in and was so electric like that. Like, he has a couple different rush moves. He's got speed and bend, a spin move to get to the inside. And when he wins, he's through. He's got a clear path to the quarterback, and that's why he was able to, get 8 sacks on his 17 pressures. So, no, you're not expecting him to convert 50% of his pressures into sacks, but with a larger workload, can he get a lot more pressures? I think so. Now, do teams start to load up his film and say, okay, this is how he's trying to attack you, and get offensive tackles a little bit more prepared for his unique pass rushing skill set? That's where you're going to have some hesitation on if he can keep it up. But was an obvious find, has some talent, I'd be a little bit afraid of, like Gennard Avery, for those that remember him, burst onto the scene as like a 6th-round find for the Eagles, had similar production in his rookie year, and then just disappeared. Like, I hope that's not James Houston, but the sample size is very small, and there's like no run defense really to go off of at all for him. He's a designated pass rusher off the bench. Let's stick with the edge. I actually like John Kaminsky. This deep dive series did its work last year because I think I had the eyes next to him and said, you know what, that Atlanta should not have let him go. Like, he can play in the snaps that he's been out there. He is a really athletic, big-bodied hybrid end, does a little bit of everything. Just a really useful player for a hybrid front like this, where he'll put his hand in the dirt and play 5-tech and help out against the run. He'll help you run stunts because he can be either the blow-up man, the occupy man, or he can loop. Like, you can do so many different things with him. Such a useful player. He's on the 2nd year of his contract. Don't be surprised if John Kaminsky gets a nice-sized contract extension here or somewhere else. Not a game changer, but again, a useful player. And then you've got a bunch of other edge guys here. Charles Harris, who fell off last year due to injury after a breakout 2021 season, a former first-round pick. That has bounced around a little bit, but worked out here. And, if he can be somewhere between what he was in 2021 and 2022, you like that as a rotational third. He's cheap. Like, why not? Again, not a difference maker, but a functional starting caliber pass rusher. Don't love him out there as a run defender on early downs. So you want to scheme around that. That's why they have Josh Pascal. 2nd-round pick last year. Missed a ton of time due to injury. I like Pascal, again, as a non-difference maker, rotational, kind of quasi-starting defensive end. I think with John Kaminsky really bursting into that role that I think they saw for Josh Pascal as that bigger-bodied defensive end, I don't know how much you're going to get from Pascal as long as Kaminsky's here, but sure is nice to have 2 of those guys and creates even more options for this front. Then you got Romeo Okwara. Had to throw a question mark next to his name. It's like, what the hell are you getting from a Romeo Okwara? They gave him a huge contract extension, and then he fell off the face of the earth. Injuries have just completely derailed what was looking like a promising career, where he was, kind of in that breath that we had just talked about with like Alex Highsmith for the Steelers as like a really high-end number 2 rusher. Man, he has been completely underwhelming. They haven't been able to get out of that contract because he's so expensive. So what did they get from him? He came back late last season and showed some flashes, but certainly wasn't his old self. I mean, that would be house money if Romeo Okwara can get back to his old self. And then this would be actually a pretty damn good pass rush, because then Aiden Hutchinson has a true Robin to his Batman. Right now, you're kind of counting on James Houston continuing to show what he did and to be that guy. But complete unknown what you can get from Romeo Okwara. And then Julian Okwara. Both the Okwara brothers missed a lot of time for injury last year. Julian's never shown the upside that Romeo has, but he's as a stand-up edge, he can drop into coverage and provide some flexibility in that way. I still like him as a role player, but his ship has probably sailed for a breakout season. So like I said, a ton of names, but for the most part, it's a bunch of guys that NFL level tackles aren't going to be all that afraid of. And then Aiden Hutchinson definitely, arrow pointing up, we'll see just how great he can be. On the interior, though, very interested to see what Aleem McNeil does this year. They liked what they saw from Isaiah Buggs enough as a nose tackle that they've asked Aleem McNeil to slim down yet again. I think he entered the league at 335. I think he played at 325 last year, and now he's down to 315. That's very interesting. He is a really special athlete. He's quick. He's powerful. The upside's real nice on Aleem McNeil, and I've got the arrow pointing up on him. I think he's going to make my top 10 breakout list for the 2023 NFL season. I love that they're going to be asking a lot less of him to eat double teams and command respect up front. They're just going to let him play a little bit more loose, and he's a dangerous player, man. His high-end plays, you can see how special it is. It's just some of the down-to-down consistency that's been a little bit more inconsistent, for lack of a better term. But yeah, I'm a big Aleem McNeil fan, and could be fireworks. And if that happens, and Aiden Hutchinson takes a step up, the Lions are in business. And I think they're really counting on that, along with maybe some James Houston development. because they really didn't invest much in this group at all. So maybe they're higher on this group than a lot of people, but we mentioned Bugs. I like what he can do in the middle. Really not a lot of high-end consistency in terms of run defense, but the flashes are there. Some of the stuff he did in the last couple weeks of the season, I think, is definitely what inspired the confidence in Detroit to bring him back. He can at least hold his own against double teams and open things up for everybody else. How consistently can he split double teams? And is he a playmaker when he gets one-on-one opportunities? That's going to be wait and see, but I have the up arrow pointing on him as well. He's a guy out of Alabama that has taken some time to become a good NFL player or even a capable starter or anything like that. But I know a lot of the Lions fans are excited for him because of what he showed in the last 6 weeks of last season, and I can't really blame you. As a rotational nose, he's a nice piece. Now, they're not all in on Isaiah Bugs being that guy because they did spend a third-round pick on Broderick Martin. I don't know if there's a huge difference between what Broderick Martin was coming into the league and what Isaiah Bugs was. You know, both these guys, I will say, for nose tackles, have a good first step and are freight trains as bull rushers, but that's all they can do. Isaiah Bugs actually showed some moments and some promise as a pocket-pushing nose. But Broderick Martin, his size alone will help him defend the run, but he's got to learn to play with discipline, how to, drop his dead leg against double teams. He has a long way to go before I'm comfortable with him out there getting significant playing time, but there are physical tools there that they're hoping to develop in a similar way that they did with Isaiah Bugs. They also have Benito Jones, similar sort of storyline there, a guy that was a highly recruited player that wasn't good coming into the NFL and showed flashes last season. So they have a type up front there. We'll see what their coaching can accomplish there. It's a tall task, but we'll see. They bring in Christian Covington to get a little bit more veteran presence in there, but he's a non-factor. And then you still got Levi Awuzurike chilling down there. It's injuries have completely derailed his career. At this point, he's a second-round bust, and anything you can get from him is house money. Athletic guy with upside, but if you're a Lions fan still holding out hope for Levi, technically the upside is there and you never know, but I'm definitely not counting on it. So obviously a lot of names. They're going to move these guys around. They're going to function as a solid NFL pass rush, but is it a difference-making unit at this point in time? I would say not yet. I can't entirely fault them for sticking by their guys and hoping another year of development can turn this into a special pass rush. But as they sit right now, again, 22nd in pass rush, 24th in D-line run defense, still a bit of a ways to go before this group can help them be a great defense. But then we've got these linebackers, and where do we want to start? I mean, they bring Alex Anzalone back before the draft for 3 years, $18 million, a lot of money for a guy that is just an okay starter. I mean, okay, I guess I don't entirely hate it, but I wouldn't say I love it. He's a guy that is just a little bit more hit or miss as a run defender than you like for a guy that you're paying that much money. I feel like he splashes a lot against the run, but can be late to trigger and loses gap discipline a lot as well. He's also just okay in coverage. I like the way he reads and reacts to the quarterback's eyes, but really not a fluid athlete or anything special in man-to-man coverage, which they want to run. He doesn't have amazing speed to contain the quarterback. He's not some special blitzer. I don't know. He's fine. He's a solid player. They like his leadership. Okay. But then they take Jack Campbell. It's okay, they really have a type here at linebacker. They want these physical-minded, big-bodied linebackers, and Jack Campbell's 6'4", 6'5", crazy reach. I love Jack Campbell. He was my number one linebacker in this draft. I think he's going to step in and be a plus run defender right away. I saw nothing at Iowa that tells me otherwise. Whether it's the tackling consistency, his ability to read his keys, his size, willingness, and technique to take on, stack, and shed, I think it's special. And from that perspective, he's going to be an upgrade to this run defense that did have their struggles last year. And for all of the flashes Malcolm Rodriguez showed, he had some ugly reps against the run, whether it was being too aggressive or his lack of size hurting them against the run. And lack of size is not going to be a question mark anymore with these linebackers. I do think coverage is a question mark. Honestly, they're putting their best athletes on the bench with these decisions to bring both these guys in, because both Rodriguez and Barnes are the best athletes they have in this linebacker room, at least in terms of range and speed. Campbell's fluid. He can, make some plays in coverage. He certainly did at Iowa. Heady zone player, but what you do notice about Campbell is the lack of speed. When he tries to pick guys up on crossing routes, he starts to lag behind very quickly. We already mentioned Anzalone's not the best coverage player either. So, I think Campbell can prove to be a good coverage player due to his instincts. Very similar to Josie Jewell, who we talked about with the Broncos, also coming out of Iowa. But needs to prove that at the NFL level. Linebacker, as smart as Jack Campbell is a difficult position to step in and learn right away. I don't think he's like other first-round linebackers in guys like Quay Walker and Kenneth Murray, who have processing concerns coming out, or at least questions. I really think Campbell's going to step in and be a good linebacker right away. Does he return the positional value? With the 19th pick, we'll see. He's going to have to be a really freaking dominant linebacker. But I'll just say I didn't think this was as egregious as the Jahmyr Gibbs pick. So they do rank 28th for linebacker coverage for some of those weaknesses we mentioned. They're going to want to protect these guys with those safeties coming down into that intermediate part of the field. But 14th in linebacker run defense. The depth is nice, man. As said in the beginning of the show, I still believe in Derek Barnes as an edge coming out of Purdue. I think he's shown a lot of flashes. I thought his run defense improved last year. He has real speed, sideline to sideline. Even showed some reps matching guys up the seam, running a mid-read in cover 2. So he's not going to get to see the field anymore, but maybe he ends up with a different team in a year and can still figure things out. Malcolm Rodriguez turns into some of the best linebacker depth in the NFL. And one of the best special teamers. I mean, he just loves to run and hit. He's got 4.5 speed. Made a name for himself on Hard Knocks and was probably the best rookie linebacker in the NFL last year. So again, it was just a little bit surprising that they basically, whether it was bringing Anzalone back or drafting Jack Campbell, take one and leave one. I'm just a little bit surprised that they didn't believe in Malcolm Rodriguez to be the other guy. Because you're just not going to get a lot of 3 linebacker defenses in any scheme in the NFL, even if he plays 200 snaps and makes an impact there. The rest of the depth, you got Jalen Reeves-Maben, journeyman veteran, and Anthony Pittman, who's played 100 snaps for this team. Haven't seen anything special there. But let's move on to the defensive backs. And Aaron Glenn is going to have the time of his life, mixing and matching where he wants to ultimately play these guys. And I'm very curious to see where it all settles. I think the picture I'm painting here is a pretty safe projection where you got Cam Sutton and Emmanuel Mosley as your outside corners, as long as Mosley can be back off the pup, where he's going to start training camp on, coming off, an ACL for the Niners last year. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. They gave him kind of a 1-year prove-it deal here. And then Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is kind of your starting slot corner. That's really what he played with Aaron Glenn in New Orleans. I think that's where he's shown his best coverage tape. I know he had the interceptions for Philly last year. Those are a little bit more fluky. I think his natural position is this nickel corner. I think that's where they're going to play him. And then you got your 2 safeties, Tracy Walker and Kirby Joseph. And then Brian Branch being the second-round pick that they traded up for. I think Branch will play. But with them bringing in Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, I can only imagine they view Brian Branch as the long-term answer as the nickel corner. So, we'll see how much starting time Brian Branch gets. When they go to dime packages, though, I'm almost sure that they'll view Brian Branch as their P.J. Williams. This is that Saints secondary coaching staff that is going to want that role in this defense. So I think that's going to be Brian Branch, and he's going to play a lot. And that's 6 really fun defensive backs, even if there's not a superstar amidst that group. Because between the corners, Sutton has been a very solid corner for the Steelers. Not a perfect player. He's played a little slot, played a little bit outside. I think he can hold up just fine in this system, but he's not the fastest guy. He's not the biggest guy. He will lose, but he's going to be very reliable. I think better than whatever they had last year. They gave him a 3-year, $30+ million contract, and that's legit starter money, and I think he's going to live up to that. Mosley is a little bit more of a question just because of the health, but as long as he's the guy that he's been for San Francisco for the last 3 years, he honestly might be a better cover corner than even Sutton, and he probably would have gotten even at least the same contract if he wasn't coming off the ACL. So a prove-it year for him, along with Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. These guys, talk about that Lions culture. They're bringing these guys in to compete and prove it and earn a lot of money, which they have shown at the peak of their powers, that they are really good players at their position, both Mosley and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. Johnson's a little bit more of a risk taker, very physical guy. You get the C+ run defense grade there because he misses tackles and takes bad angles a lot of the times, but he'll splash play and a trash talker. He's a physical presence and just a complete Detroit Lion. He's going to make a ton of sense here. And you kind of felt it when he left the Saints secondary. You kind of felt that missing physical presence. And even if he's not a consistent run defender, you do feel it, trying to play 60 snaps against him in that short to intermediate part of the field. So, it's a really solid group of three. As far as the safeties go, I love getting Tracy Walker back. He can play free. He can play strong. He's got range. He can man you up. He's never been a lockdown guy or this overly dynamic playmaker or a elite presence against the run, but has been an underrated player for this Lions team, despite him playing all those years where they've had no talent around him. He can now be arguably the fifth or even sixth best defensive back in this group, and just coexist as a sound piece amidst everybody else. Missed all of last season for the most part with an injury. He played the first 3 games, I think. And then Kirby Joseph, he might have the highest upside out of anybody here, a.k.a. Aaron Rodgers' father. If he played like he did against the Packers every week, you're talking about fucking Ed Reed. But, it wasn't that good every single week. That's a tough ask. But you can definitely see the zone instincts. He watches film. He's got range to play deep safety. He can come downfield and tackle, even if he missed some plays. As a rookie, that's fine. You'll take that. At Illinois and at times at Detroit, he showed he can come down in the box and man guys up. So Kirby, like I said, he's got the best upside out of this group. A lot of similarities to Kevin Byard in his game. Also a 3rd-round pick, and I would say that's not out of question. He's just got to keep making plays and keep cleaning up some of the inconsistencies. But I really was impressed by Kirby Joseph. Was quietly a defensive player of the year candidate in a year where Sauce Gardner didn't exist, and in a year where Aiden Hutchinson wasn't on his own team. But he had a great season, was genuinely one of the best defensive rookies in last year's draft. And then you got Brian Branch, who was just a model of consistency at Alabama. Were some questions as far as what is his upside? What is his position at the next level? Is he a slot corner? Is he a strong safety? Is he a free safety? Very minimal snaps as a true safety. And here, unless they let Tracy Walker go, I don't really see a path for him to be a safety. I think his path is as we described. The PJ Williams role, 15, 20 snaps a game, where he's going to be one of the best dime backs in the league. That's the perfect role for him. He's just a ridiculously consistent tackler. Love Brian Branch. Should not have gone as late as he did. And he's going to make an impact here, even if he's not a full-time starter. And then I fully expect, honestly, that he overtakes Chauncey Gardner-Johnson in a year. Unless Gardner-Johnson has a even better year than he had last year, and Detroit's we can't let you go, and we'll just keep Brian Branch as PJ Williams and live with it. Hard to complain about that too, but Branch does deserve to be a full-time starter at some point, and hopefully he can prove that this year as a dime back. Pretty good depth. Jerry Jacobs, Will Harris had to play a lot last year. Let's just say they're happy that they don't have to be starters, but that experience is useful. Jacobs is a physical presence on the outside. If Mosley is slow to get back, you can live with Jerry Jacobs for a couple weeks. I don't think they would put Brian Branch or Gardner-Johnson in there as outside corners. That would be different than what they've shown in the past, but I'm not going to act like they couldn't handle it. It'd be interesting to see. But Will Harris might allude actually to the thought of them doing that, because Will Harris was a safety coming out, a 3rd-round safety, really fast guy, overall defensive back who's been asked to be more of a corner here lately. Just another one of these versatile guys that can move all over. Chase Lucas made the team as a 7th-round pick last year. Instinctive, fun, kind of undersized corner, solid depth. Love Star Thomas. Hate that he decided to come to Detroit, because there's probably 28 other teams where I would look at him and say he can be the next undrafted slot corner that surprises the league and comes in and becomes a starter at some point. I don't see that path here. He's going to have to get through Branch and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. And even Cam Sutton is oftentimes at his best been a slot guy. So, like, I don't know what the hell his agent was thinking, telling him to go to Detroit, but obviously Detroit liked him and attracted him in here. If he doesn't make the team, keep an eye on where he goes, because Star Thomas was definitely a draftable prospect. I thought probably the second best slot corner in this draft after the kid Atlanta got out of Utah. And if nothing else, he's going to be a potential return man and a special teams demon for them. As far as the safety depth goes, you do still have Ifeatu Melifonwu. You know, he's converting to safety. Never loved his cornerback tape, but as another one of these flexible safeties, he makes sense. Just keep on growing through special teams. There's upside there, but you hope that you don't have to lean on him, because if a safety goes down, I think they would slide Brian Branch up into one of those safety spots. They also pick up Brandon Joseph, so two of the best, if not the two best, undrafted defensive back pickups in the league. Star Thomas we mentioned, but also Brandon Joseph. Not a player I viewed with a lot of upside, just doesn't really have a lot of speed, but reminds me a lot of these like quarters-heavy safeties that don't have a lot of upside that have played well. Guys like Jordan Fuller for the Rams, maybe even as much as like John Johnson, who's had some time in the sun. Just smart, instinctive, well-rounded safeties. Schematically, you know, they don't really run the quarters thing, so he doesn't have the range to be a free safety. He doesn't have the size and thumping ability to be a strong safety, but they obviously liked his tape and said, why not? Savion Smith, another one of these hybrid D-backs out of Alabama, and then Brady Breeze, one of my dudes coming out of Oregon, just hasn't really shown it at the next level, but I guess we'll keep an eye on him if he makes it and hold on for that draft take. I had him as a my guy and a sleeper in that draft. That obviously hasn't worked out, but they rank 16th for me in DB coverage, which honestly makes a ton of sense. You have a bunch of super solid, good starters. Nobody is great or elite or anything close to that, but yeah, it just makes sense, right? And then they do come out as a tier 4 DB run support team. It doesn't count for much. It doesn't really help this team a ton or hurt this team a ton. They're just fine in terms of DB run support, with a couple question marks with Mosley and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson's up and down streakiness, and really the lack of a true high-end run defense presence just kind of leaves them in the middle there for DB run support. But that wraps up the defense, and they come out 23rd for overall defense, 22nd in pass defense, and 27th in run defense. They did struggle against the run last year. It was a liability for them, and without really addressing the interior D-line, I don't think it's going to be that much better. I like bringing in Jack Campbell there, and that's going to help. The goal for everyone is just don't suck against the run ultimately, and I don't think they truly suck against the run, but the best run teams are going to look at this front and say, all right, we can get some push on this group and have some good days against the Lions on the ground, which we did see last year. Like, look at that Panthers game. They got gashed, and it's the same guys other than Jack Campbell. The pass defense, I think, is more established. Pass rush is very solid, though unspectacular. The coverage is very good, though not spectacular. Linebacker coverage will be a question, but that doesn't carry a ton of weight. Like, they're hoping to be an average defense and a great offense. That's going to be their path to meeting their expectations. I think there's a couple pieces that will need to come along if those are to happen, but I'm definitely not going to say that can't happen or even necessarily bet against this coaching staff to make that happen, though the expectations are pretty damn high for this team. We do need to talk about the special teams for a second. They rank in that tier 3 of really good special teams. I like upgrading with Riley Patterson. The coverage unit should be pretty good. good punter. They just got to clean up some of the mistakes they made last year, and they can be a great special teams. I think Dan Campbell will put a higher priority on that this year as well. And then recapping their strengths and weaknesses. I mean, how can the culture not be a big strength? They've earned that benefit of the doubt. They've earned the right to be called one of the toughest teams in the league, even though they're not going to be the upset team that they've been, the underdog team that they've been. I think they still bring that mentality. Part of that comes with the confidence they get from their play calling and the offensive line coming out off the bus just ready to kick you in the mouth. That's all, to me, what I think about when I think about the Detroit Lions. I did list their depth and flexibility in the secondary as a strength, while the secondary as a whole is just good, not great. I think you pair it with a smart defensive back minded coach in Aaron Glenn, and they're going to be solid throughout the year because they have so many pieces and they're so flexible to move them in and around. And when you compare that to what a lot of teams are working with, I do view that as a strength, really patching up what was more of a weakness last year with that secondary. But more of the weaknesses, for the first 6 weeks of the season, I think receiver is a weakness. Amon-Ra St. Brown can't do everything, and those 6 games are going to matter. I mean, you look at this team last year, they had a rough start to their season. They got hot in the second half, but it wasn't enough. Like, is that going to happen again? It could. Run defense again. They didn't invest much in that front seven other than Jack Campbell. So I don't expect massive gains there other than internal development. And then I do think their lack of an elite numbers-changing defensive player just makes things so much easier on opposing offenses. There's nobody on this defense that opposing offenses have to circle on the chalkboard on Tuesday and be like, hey, how are we going to come up with a game plan for how to stop this guy? For the most part, opposing teams are going to be able to line up and run whatever they want to run against Detroit, and Detroit doesn't have a whole lot of schematic difference makers to force offenses to play left-handed either. So I do view that as a weakness, even if there's depth and balance across the board with the defense. But let's look at their schedule and wrap this thing up. And I've been alluding to it, but the hype is high on this Lions team. A 9.5 over-under for the team. Super Bowl odds at 20-1. Division odds almost even money to win this division. And that's where I really disagree, is with the division. Like I said, I haven't revealed the Vikings yet. I think the Vikings are a better team heading into the year, slightly. So for Detroit to be first there, but even then, I think Green Bay and Chicago also have a decent enough chance to compete with Detroit. So I disagree there. I definitely struggle with the 20-1 odds on the Super Bowl. Maybe bet the NFC if you're a diehard Lions fan. But I don't know if I see the upside with this team to go meet an AFC team and beat them. And then the over-under is 9.5. I get it. I do. To me, I know the market loves Detroit, and I'm just a little bit worried that that's overinflated by a half a game or a full game. My formula has it much closer to an 8.5 over under. So if I had to bet, I'd honestly take the under, just playing the odds, but I'm not going to make this bet myself. I do still believe in Dan Campbell and I believe in this team. Their schedule's really not that bad. The first 6 games of the season are going to be so critical. And what does this offense look like without Jameson Williams? Because you got to go to Kansas City. You got Seattle coming to town. They're going to have to keep up with that offense. Atlanta, Atlanta, I think Detroit will be favored against, but we know what Atlanta's run game is capable of. They match up pretty well against Detroit without Jameson Williams. Jeff Okudah revenge game. Mike Hughes revenge game. Having to go to Lambeau without Jameson Williams is not going to be easy. Carolina, Bryce Young coming to town. At Tampa. None of those games are easy. You got to go to Baltimore. The first 7 games there are pretty tough. It does lighten up in the second half of the year as this thing does start to get rolling. I honestly think this is going to look pretty similar to last year, where they might start 3-5, and then it's just going to be a matter of, can they get things rolling and come in hot down the stretch, where they got 2 big games against Minnesota in the last 3 games of the year, Chicago twice in the second half of the year, Green Bay at home. really an opportunity to finish strong. If they start hot, though, they're going to be in serious business. You know, if they could start 5-2 or whatever, yeah, dude. Like, even if they beat Kansas City week 1, like the hype is only going to continue to build from there. But this was a really difficult team to analyze because I believe in them. I'm not as high on the hype. I tried to balance that. I hope that came through okay. I really struggled with this recording. I did. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Please do hit that like button. We are on to the top half of the series, starting to pick things up. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of those as we go. Let me know your comments down below, what you think. Definitely going to be a polarizing one, but I appreciate you for watching, for listening, for hearing me out. We'll see you later. Peace out.